I used to live alone in a small ground-floor house just outside of town. It wasn't in a dangerous area. Most of my neighbors were older couples or families, and the street was usually silent after dark. Because of that, I never felt unsafe. I didn't even own a security system, just locks on the doors and windows that I checked before bed out of habit. That night had been no different. I came home from work, made something simple to eat, and spent a couple of hours on my laptop before calling it a night. I remember walking through the house, shutting off the lights one by one, and checking each window latch. I always did. By the time I lay down, I was sure everything was locked. At some point in the early hours, I woke up. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, more like my body telling me something wasn't right. I lay there in the dark, listening. At first there was nothing, just the hum of the fridge down the hall. Then I heard it. A sharp, metallic clink, like something small had hit the kitchen floor. I stayed still, convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe a utensil slipping off the counter, but my heart was already beating harder. The sound had been too distinct, too real. I finally sat up, staring at the faint glow from the hallway, trying to decide if I had the nerve to get up and check. I forced myself to leave the bed, moving quietly even though I knew it didn't matter. If someone was in the house, they already knew I was awake. My phone flashlight felt weak in my hand as I stepped into the hallway. Every shadow looked wrong. The kitchen was straight ahead. The sound had come from there. When I reached the doorway, I stopped dead. The small window above the sink was cracked open. I couldn't understand how. I had checked it. I was certain. I moved closer, shining the light on the frame. The latch was undone, the curtain pushed to the side. On the floor beneath the sink, faint smears of mud led away from the window and across the tile. Whoever had opened that window had come inside. I turned my light toward the living room. That was when I saw the chair. I always pushed the dining chair fully under the table. Now one of them sat at an angle, as if someone had been sitting there only moments ago. The silence felt heavier than the sound I'd heard earlier. I backed up toward my bedroom, trying not to breathe too loudly. I shut the door, locked it, and called the police. I kept my voice calm for the dispatcher, though my chest was tight enough that each sentence came out clipped. They told me to stay where I was and wait for officers to arrive. Those next minutes stretched like hours. I sat on the floor with my ear pressed to the door. At first there was nothing, then faint creaks, wood shifting under weight, the sound of the house settling, or someone moving just out of sight. I heard what I swear was a slow drag, like a foot sliding across the floor. When the knock finally came, I almost didn't open. The officers announced themselves twice before I believed it. I let them in, relief mixing with the kind of panic that doesn't fade right away. They split up, checking every room, every closet, even the attic hatch. Their flashlights cut through the dark corners I hadn't dared to look at. After 10 minutes, one of them came back shaking his head. "No one's here," the other agreed. They said it wasn't uncommon for burglars to slip out quickly once they realized the house wasn't empty. They pointed out that nothing seemed to be missing. Maybe I had scared them off just by moving around. That explanation made sense, but it didn't sit right. The window latch hadn't been forced. It was opened cleanly, as if someone had lifted it from the inside. I told myself maybe I had left it unlocked by accident, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The officers walked me through the rooms again, showing me there was no sign of anyone left inside. When they left, the house felt too quiet, as though the walls were listening. I tried to calm myself, but as I passed the living room, my eyes went straight back to the chair. It was still angled wrong, just slightly, like a detail only I would notice. I couldn't bring myself to sleep after that. I stayed awake until morning, lights on, waiting for the sun to take the weight off the house. Every sound kept me tense. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint rattle of the pipes, my own breathing. When daylight finally came, I checked the kitchen again. The mud tracks were clearer now in the light. They didn't just come in through the window. They circled once near the table. Whoever it was had stood there before disappearing into the rest of the house. That realization made it worse than if they had just been trying to steal. Whoever broke in wasn't rushing. They had time. They were calm enough to move a chair and look around. Calm enough to be inside while I was sleeping down the hall. I spent the entire day on edge, waiting for the call from the police station to tell me they'd found someone. It never came. That evening, 2 officers returned to take a more careful look. They told me there had been reports of similar break-ins nearby, and they wanted to double-check my place for anything they might have missed. I followed them from room to room, uneasy, but certain nothing else could surprise me. Then one of them crouched beside my bed. "Is this yours?" he asked. He pulled out a shoe. A men's sneaker, worn down, caked with dirt. It wasn't mine. I didn't even own that brand. They checked the rest of the house again, top to bottom, but found nothing else. No forced entry marks, no stolen property. Just that single shoe. The strangest part was where it had been. Not in the kitchen, not near the door, but under the bed, where I had been sleeping only hours earlier. Later, an officer told me off the record that the shoe matched the description of a suspect in other local cases. A man who broke into homes at night, not to steal, but to stay for a while. He left behind random items like a calling card, proof that he'd been there. I never slept another night in that house. Moving out didn't erase the thought that someone had been watching me as I slept. And the worst part, I'll never know how long they stood there before leaving. The house I was renting had an unfinished basement. I never spent time down there. It was damp, poorly lit, and mostly used for boxes and old furniture. I rarely even opened the door unless I needed to put something away. The first time it happened, I was half asleep in my room. As I was lying in bed, I heard a noise from below me. It wasn't pipes or the normal creaks the house made. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across concrete. I stayed still, listening. A minute later, there were 2 slow footsteps, and then silence. The noises came back the next few nights, always late, always from the same spot underneath me. Sometimes it was movement, other times the faint click of metal. It was never quick or random. It had rhythm, like someone deliberately trying to stay quiet. At first I tried to ignore it, staying in bed until morning. But the longer it went on, the clearer it became that this wasn't the house settling. The sounds were deliberate. Someone was in the basement, and they weren't in a hurry to leave. After nearly a week of hearing those noises, I finally decided to check. I waited until the following night, kept every light in the house off, and sat awake in the dark. Around 1 a.m., the sound started again. A scrape, like wood against stone. Then the steady thump of something shifting weight. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly opened the basement door. The air that rose up from below was stale, colder than the rest of the house. I stood there a moment, pointing the beam down the wooden steps. Nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place. Just stacks of boxes and old furniture shapes that threw long shadows. I walked down carefully. Every step groaned, making it impossible to stay quiet. At the bottom, I swept the light across the floor. I saw a box pushed into the middle of the room, not where I'd left it. On top of it sat an empty water bottle. It wasn't mine. The rest of the room looked normal. I checked behind shelves, under the old table. Nothing. My pulse was hammering in my ears by the time I climbed back up and shut the door. I convinced myself maybe someone had gotten in once and left things behind. But I knew better. The next night, the noises came earlier. This time, instead of dragging or steps, I heard what sounded like quiet rummaging, objects being shifted around. I didn't go down. I sat awake until morning, staring at the basement door like it might open on its own. 2 days later, I noticed food missing. Nothing obvious, but a couple of cans were gone from the pantry, and a pack of granola bars I had opened was lighter than I remembered. That's when it clicked. Whoever was down there wasn't sneaking in and out. They were staying. I called a friend, asked him to come over, and together we searched the basement in daylight. Everything looked normal at first, until he pointed at the far corner behind a stack of old boxes. Tucked between the wall and the concrete support beam was a rolled-up blanket and a half-empty bag of chips. Next to it, a small flashlight with dying batteries. I don't know how long I stood staring at that spot. It wasn't just someone passing through. This person had set up a space. We backed out and called the police. When they came, they searched the area more thoroughly. In addition to the blanket and food, they found a notebook wedged behind the boxes. It had scribbled notes, dates, times, and short lines. Notes about me, my schedule. The officers told me it looked like the person had been watching when I left, when I came home, when I turned in for the night. They didn't find the person, though. Whoever it was had cleared out quickly. That night, even with the police telling me they'd do extra patrols, I couldn't relax. Nothing sounded random anymore. It all felt like movement with purpose. A floorboard popping, a gust of wind against the siding. It all seemed connected. I kept replaying the thought that whoever had been in the basement knew every detail of my routine. A week passed without any new signs. I forced myself to believe it was over. But then, one morning, I woke up and walked into the kitchen. Sitting on the counter was a coffee mug that didn't belong to me. It wasn't there when I went to bed. I called the police again, but there was little they could do. They searched and found no forced entry. No one in the basement this time. No prints, just a single item left out of place, like a message. From then on, the noises stopped. Nothing else went missing. No more strange objects appeared, but that didn't make it easier. Knowing someone had lived under my feet for days, maybe longer, and that they had the nerve to walk through the house while I was asleep, that stuck with me. The landlord ended my lease early after hearing about it. Apparently, there had been other complaints from past tenants about strange activity around the basement. No one had ever stayed long enough to figure it out. I moved out and never went back. I never found out who that person was or how long they had been down there before I realized it. The only thing I do know is that they had been close enough to hear me walking above them every single night, and comfortable enough to keep notes on my life, as if they were planning for something more. About a month before everything happened, I found a bouquet of flowers sitting against my front door. Tucked inside was a small card with no name, no message, nothing identifying who left it. I thought it was odd, but I brushed it off. I didn't know anyone who would send me something like that, and I decided not to dwell on it. Weeks passed, and I almost forgot about it. Around that time, my friend Emma stayed with me for a few nights. It wasn't unusual to hear her moving around late, getting water or looking through the kitchen. When I heard drawers opening one night, I didn't pay much attention. But then it hit me. Emma had left the day before. I was completely alone. The sound from the hallway continued. Slow steps on the floor, then silence. I stayed in bed, staring at the bedroom door, trying to make sense of it. It didn't match the random creaks I was used to. It was measured, almost careful. That was when the handle on my bedroom door clicked. The knob turned slowly, careful, like whoever was holding it didn't want me to notice. My entire focus locked on that door, waiting to see if it would push open. I stayed completely still, staring at the door. The knob turned a fraction more, then stopped. A second passed, then another. Finally, the door pushed inward a few inches. The hinge made the faintest sound, and then nothing else. Whoever was out there didn't step inside. They just left it halfway open. I could feel the air shift from the hallway, cooler than the bedroom. My chest tightened as I waited. Every instinct told me to move, but I couldn't bring myself to. I just listened. For a while, there was nothing but silence. Then the sound of weight shifting on the floorboards outside. Someone was standing right there. Minutes crawled by. The door didn't move again. I forced myself to sit up, keeping my eyes locked on that opening. I expected to see a face appear, but it never happened. Finally, the door began to close. Slowly, carefully, until the latch clicked into place. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in the same position until morning light came through the blinds. Only then did I step out into the hallway. That was when I noticed faint streaks in the dust near the baseboard. Lines, like the edge of a shoe had been pivoting in place. The next night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep at all. I left the bedroom light on and sat with my back against the wall, staring at the door. Nothing happened until after midnight. That same sound, the soft twist of the knob, broke the silence. The door eased open just enough for me to see the darkness of the hall. Again, no one entered. Again, after minutes of waiting, the door slid back into its frame. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but the pattern was too exact. All was the same. A careful turn, a slow push, a pause, then retreat. Whoever was doing it wanted me to know they were there. I bought a chair the following day and wedged it under the handle before going to bed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to pressure against the door. The chair legs scraped against the floor as the knob twisted from the other side. The force wasn't violent, but steady, testing the block I had put there. I held my breath, gripping my phone in one hand. After several seconds, the pressure stopped. The knob went still. When I looked in the morning, the chair had shifted several inches. Someone had leaned against the door long enough to push it. I called the police that afternoon. They came, checked the locks, and walked through every room. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing they could use. They asked if I had given a key to anyone. I hadn't. They told me to call again if it happened, but there wasn't much more they could do. That night, I hardly blinked. I kept my phone recording audio on the dresser, just in case. Around 3 a.m., the sound came again. The knob turned, the chair pressed forward, then nothing. I listened to the recording the next day. The playback caught every second. The metallic click, the drag of the chair, and then, faintly, a breath. By the 4th night, I was running on no sleep. I sat awake until after 3, then drifted off against my will. When I snapped awake, the door was already open halfway. The chair was still wedged under the handle, but it had been moved aside. Whoever was out there had taken the time to pull the chair just enough to slip the door open again. I lay frozen in bed, watching the dark gap of the doorway. Nothing moved inside. I strained to hear any sound at all, but the silence was complete. I don't know how long I stared before exhaustion pulled me under again. When I woke in daylight, the door was shut. The chair was back under the handle. I couldn't tell if I had put it there myself, half asleep, or if someone else had moved it. The only clear thing was the marks on the floor, scratches where the chair had been dragged more than once. At that point, I stopped trying to sleep in my bedroom. I dragged blankets into the living room and stayed on the couch. Lights on all night. Even there, I caught myself glancing at the hallway, expecting the door to move. I kept telling myself it would stop if I ignored it, but the unease never faded. On the 5th night, just past 2, I heard footsteps. Not from the bedroom this time, straight across the hall, near the front door. Slow, measured, then silence. I waited, phone in hand, staring toward the darkened hallway. I thought about rushing out, but I couldn't. Every muscle locked up, and I sat there, waiting for whatever would happen next. When I finally called the police again, they came during the day and did another walkthrough. Every window was still locked from the inside, and the front door showed no signs of being forced. One of the officers told me it was possible someone had a copy of my key. That thought stayed in my head long after they left. I tried to convince myself it was just a break-in attempt, but later that evening I went through the house on my own. When I opened my dresser drawers, I realized several items of clothing were missing. It wasn't money or jewelry. It was personal things. Undergarments that had no value to anyone but me. That's when I understood this wasn't a random intruder. Whoever had been in my home was there for reasons that had nothing to do with robbery. I sat in my living room replaying everything in my head. The careful way the door opened. The patience of whoever stood there without saying a word. The way the chair had been moved and then put back. It wasn't about getting caught. It was about letting me know. That's when the memory hit me. The flowers. The anonymous bouquet left at my door a month earlier with a blank card. I had ignored it at the time, but now it felt obvious. This wasn't someone testing locks at random. This was someone who had picked me specifically. And the worst part is knowing that even after I left that house, they might still be out there, watching someone else the same way.